They found the first body on a Tuesday morning, hanging upside down from the timber supports like a slaughtered hog. And that's when the men started talking about shutting down Tunnel Number 9 for good. But nobody wanted to listen to a bunch of superstitious coal miners, especially not when the Blackwood Mining Company was pulling out 2 tons of anthracite per day from that particular shaft. I'm telling you this story because it needs to be told, and because what happened in those mountains back in 1890 says something important about what happens when profit matters more than people, when warnings get ignored until it's too late. This isn't some campfire tale meant to give you a few cheap thrills. This is about real men who died in the dark. And the thing that killed them. My great-grandfather was there. He saw it all happen. The Blackwood mine sat in a hollow between 2 mountains in eastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian Range folds in on itself like wrinkled skin. It was hard country then, and it's hard country now. The kind of place where the only jobs were underground, where men went into the earth at sunrise and came out at sunset covered in black dust, coughing up their lungs by the time they hit 40. Tunnel Number 9 had a reputation before anything bad even happened there. The old-timers who'd been working those mountains since before the Civil War said the ground was wrong in that particular spot. They said the rock felt different when you put your hand against it, that the air tasted like copper and rotting meat even when the ventilation shafts were working properly. They said there were sounds down there that didn't come from shifting stone or timber settling. But coal was coal, and Blackwood Mining Company didn't care about feelings or superstitions. They cared about the thick seam of anthracite running through that mountain like a black river. The trouble started in March of 1890, though if I'm being honest, it probably started long before that. We just didn't know it yet. A miner named Thomas Garrett came up from Number 9 in the middle of his shift, which was unusual because men didn't leave their posts unless something was seriously wrong. Thomas was a big man, over 6 feet, and built like he'd been carved from the mountain itself, with hands that could crush railroad spikes and a reputation for not being afraid of anything. But when he came up that day, his face was the color of old paper, and his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't light his pipe. "There's something down there," he told the shift supervisor, a company man named Hewitt, who had about as much sympathy as a timber rattler. "In the new section we just opened up. I heard it moving." Hewitt looked at him like he'd just proclaimed the moon was made of cheese. "You heard rocks shifting. Happens all the time. Get back down there." "Weren't no rocks," Thomas said. "Rocks don't breathe." This is where the story gets interesting, because Hewitt could have listened. He could have shut down that tunnel for a day, gone down himself to investigate, taken some precautions. But he didn't. He docked Thomas a day's pay and sent him back down with a warning that if he came up again without a good reason, he'd be looking for work elsewhere. And here's the thing we need to understand about that time and place. These men couldn't afford to lose their jobs. There wasn't unemployment insurance, wasn't welfare, wasn't anything except the company store where you bought your goods on credit against your wages, getting yourself deeper in debt every week. You worked or you starved. It was that simple and that brutal. So Thomas went back down. He didn't come back up until the end of his shift, and when he did, 3 other men came up with him. All of them looked like they'd seen something that had fundamentally rearranged their understanding of the world. They didn't talk about it, though, not where Hewitt could hear. They just washed up and went home to their families. But word travels fast in mining towns. By the next morning, every man in that camp knew that something was wrong in Tunnel Number 9. My great-grandfather, William, was working Tunnel Number 7 at that time, but he heard the stories. He heard that the men coming out of Number 9 were reporting cold spots, where the temperature would drop 30 degrees in the space of a few feet. He heard about the sounds, scraping, scratching, something that might have been words in a language nobody recognized. He heard about the smell, which one man described as like a grave that's been opened up after 100 years. The mine foreman, a man named Dalton, brought these complaints to the company superintendent. The superintendent brought them to the owner, Cornelius Blackwood himself, who had offices in Philadelphia and had probably never been closer to a coal mine than looking at one from a train window. Blackwood's response came back in a telegram: "Investigate but maintain production. Cannot afford shutdown." So Dalton went down into Tunnel Number 9 himself, taking 3 men with him, including my great-grandfather William. This is where I get the story firsthand, passed down through generations, the details worn smooth like river stones but still solid underneath. They went down in the cage elevator, that rickety wooden platform that would drop you into the earth faster than a stone down a well. The deeper they went, the colder it got. William said his breath started fogging when they passed the third level, even though it should have been getting warmer the deeper they went. Heat rises, cold sinks. That's basic physics. But basic physics didn't seem to apply in tunnel number 9. When they reached the bottom and stepped out into the main shaft, their lanterns flickered. All 4 of them at once, like something had disturbed the air. But there was no breeze. The ventilation system was working, you could hear the fans turning up above, but the air was completely still. Dead air, William called it later. Air that hadn't moved in a very long time. The newest excavation was about half a mile into the mountain. They walked in single file, their boots crunching on loose coal, their lanterns throwing shadows that seemed to move independently of their owners. William said that walk was the longest half mile of his life. They found the first strange thing about 300 yards in, marks on the walls that looked like they'd been made by something dragging itself along the rock. Deep gouges, spaced in sets of 3, running parallel to each other for about 20 feet, before stopping abruptly. The marks were too regular to be natural, too large to have been made by any tool the miners were using. Dalton examined them with his lantern held high. Probably just pick marks from the last crew, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Pick marks didn't go that deep. Pick marks didn't curve like that, following the contour of the wall like whatever made them had been moving fluidly, organically. They kept going. The cold got worse. William said he could see ice forming on the timber supports, which should have been impossible. They were deep enough that the earth's heat should have kept everything above freezing, but frost was spreading across the wood like white moss. Then they heard it. A scraping sound, metal on stone, coming from somewhere ahead of them in the darkness. Then another sound underneath it, a wet sound, like meat being dragged across a rough surface. "Hello," Dalton called out. His voice echoed strangely, coming back wrong somehow, the syllables rearranged. The scraping stopped. In the silence that followed, William heard something else. Breathing, deep, labored breathing, like something with lungs the size of barrels pulling air in and pushing it out. But there was something wrong with the rhythm. It was too slow. A breath in, then 15 seconds of nothing, then a breath out. No living thing breathed like that. "We should go back," one of the other men said. His name was Porter, and he'd been mining for 20 years. "Right now. We should go back right now." Dalton was about to agree when they saw the light. It wasn't like their lantern light. It was a pale green glow coming from around the bend ahead, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. It illuminated the walls with a sickly radiance that made the coal look almost organic, like fossilized flesh instead of compressed plant matter. And here's where Dalton made his mistake. Instead of retreating, instead of taking what they'd seen back to the surface and demanding the tunnel be closed, he moved forward. He wanted to see what was making that light. He needed to know. They rounded the bend and saw it. The excavation had broken through into something else. Not a natural cave exactly, but a space that had been hollowed out long before Blackwood Mining Company ever put a shovel in the ground. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and they were covered in marks. Not the random scratches they'd seen before, but deliberate patterns, symbols. Writing, maybe, though not in any alphabet William recognized. The green light was coming from the symbols themselves. They glowed with their own illumination, brighter in some places than others, creating a map of luminescence across the walls and ceiling. In the center of the space, there was a hole, not a mine shaft, not a natural fissure, a hole that had been dug straight down into the earth, perfectly circular, about 10 feet across. The edges were smooth as glass. The green light was stronger here, pulsing up from the depths like a heartbeat made visible. "Christ Almighty," Porter whispered. Dalton walked to the edge and looked down. William watched him stand there for a long moment, his face illuminated by that sick green glow, his expression changing from curiosity to confusion to horror. "We're closing this tunnel," Dalton said, his voice barely audible. "Right now, we're sealing it off." "What did you see?" William asked. Dalton turned to look at him, and William said later that the foreman's eyes looked different. like something had changed in them, like they were reflecting something that wasn't there. "Nothing," Dalton said. "I saw nothing. That's the problem. It goes down and there's nothing at the bottom. Nothing but that light. And the light is alive." They left quickly, almost running back toward the entrance, but as they went, they heard something behind them. A sound like stone grinding against stone, but rhythmic, purposeful. Something was coming up out of that hole. They made it back to the cage and hauled themselves up to the surface, and Dalton went straight to the telegraph office. He sent a message directly to Blackwood. "Tunnel 9 must be sealed immediately. Stop. Breakthrough into unknown structure. Stop. Unsafe to continue. Stop." The response came back within the hour. "Continue extraction. Investigate structure for additional coal seams. Suspension of operations not approved." And this is what I mean about profit over people. Cornelius Blackwood, sitting in his Philadelphia mansion, looking at production numbers and profit margins, couldn't conceive of why his foreman would want to shut down his most productive tunnel. To him, it was just money being left in the ground. To the men who actually had to go down there, it was something else entirely. But orders were orders, and jobs were jobs, and families needed to eat. The next shift went down into tunnel number 9 at 6 a.m. the following morning. 12 men, including Thomas Garrett, who needed the work too badly to refuse despite what he'd experienced. My great-grandfather wasn't among them. He'd been reassigned to tunnel number 7, and he counted himself lucky for it. At 8:30 a.m., the emergency bell rang. The cage came up from number 9 with only 7 men in it. They were screaming, all of them. Grown men who'd survived cave-ins and gas explosions and all the usual horrors of mining, screaming like children having nightmares. They said the other 5 were gone, just gone. They'd been working at the face, drilling holes for the explosive charges, when the lights went out. All of them at once, complete darkness, and in that darkness they heard it come up out of the hole. The men who survived said it sounded like a rock slide at first, like the whole mountain was coming down. But then the sound resolved into something more specific, the scrape of something massive dragging itself across stone, the wet slap of appendages or limbs or something hitting the ground, the breathing, that terrible slow breathing that filled the entire tunnel. Someone screamed to light the lanterns, matches were struck. But in the brief flares of light, they saw something that made them wish they'd stayed in darkness. One man, Jacob Finch, managed to get his lantern lit. In its light, the others saw what was with them in the tunnel. They couldn't describe it properly afterward. Their minds wouldn't let them, but they said it was big enough to fill the tunnel from floor to ceiling. They said it moved wrong, like it didn't quite understand how physics worked, like gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. They said it had things that might have been eyes, but the eyes were too large and in the wrong places. They said when it touched you, you felt cold all the way down to your bones, and the cold came with whispers in languages that predated human speech. The 5 men who disappeared. The survivors said they saw them get pulled into the thing, saw them struggle and scream, and then saw them become part of it. Absorbed, integrated. They were still screaming even after they'd been pulled inside. The 7 who escaped did so because Jacob Finch, in a moment of either bravery or pure panic, threw his lantern at the thing. The fire spread quickly in a mine full of coal dust and timber, and while the creature recoiled from the flames, the men ran. The fire was put out before it could spread beyond the new excavation area, but the damage was done. 5 men were missing and presumed dead, and the entire mining camp was on the verge of revolt. Dalton sent another telegram to Blackwood. This one was more forceful. 5 men dead. Survivors reporting hostile entity in Tunnel 9. Must seal immediately or lose entire workforce. Blackwood's response: send detailed report. Await further instruction. Maintain current production in other tunnels. No mention of the dead men. No condolences to their families. Just concern about production numbers. This is the part of the story that makes me angry even now, more than a century later. Because this pattern repeats throughout history. Workers dying because the people making decisions are too far removed from consequences. Triangle Shirtwaist, Hawk's Nest, Upper Big Branch. The names change, but the story stays the same. But here's where the miners of the Blackwood camp did something remarkable. They organized. That night, every able-bodied man in the camp gathered in the company hall. William was there. He said there were almost 200 men packed into that space, and all of them were angry. They'd worked under dangerous conditions before. Cave-ins were part of the job. Gas leaks happened. Men died in mining accidents all the time, and while it was tragic, it was understood as part of the risk. But this was different. This wasn't an accident. This was the company knowingly sending men into a place where something was killing them. Thomas Garrett stood up to speak. His voice carried across the hall, rough from years of breathing coal dust, but still strong. "They want us to go back down there," he said. "Blackwood sent word that operations continue as normal tomorrow morning. That means crews in all the tunnels, including number 9. A murmur of disbelief and anger rippled through the crowd. "Now I don't know what that thing is down there," Thomas continued. "Maybe it's some kind of animal that got trapped when we broke through. Maybe it's something else, but I know 5 good men are dead, and I know the company doesn't give a damn about anything except pulling coal out of that mountain." "So what do we do?" someone shouted from the back. "We refuse," Thomas said simply. "We refuse to go into tunnel number 9. Any man who gets assigned there, he refuses. They can fire us, they can try to evict us from company housing, but they can't mine coal without miners." This was dangerous talk in 1890. Labor unions were just starting to organize in the coal fields, and company responses to strikes and work stoppages were often violent. The coal companies had private security forces that were basically legal thugs, and they weren't afraid to use them. Men had been shot for less than what Thomas was proposing, but every man in that hall voted to support the refusal. They would not enter tunnel number 9. The next morning, when Dalton started assigning shifts, he found that he couldn't crew number 9. Every man he assigned refused the work. He threatened them with termination. They stood firm. He threatened to have them evicted from their company houses. They told him to go ahead and try evicting 200 families. Dalton, to his credit, didn't push it. He sent another telegram to Blackwood explaining the situation, and he waited for a response. What arrived 3 days later wasn't a telegram. It was a train car full of replacement workers. Scabs brought in from other mining operations, men who didn't know the history of tunnel number 9 and didn't care as long as they were getting paid. The mining company also brought in security. 20 armed men with rifles and clubs, ostensibly to maintain order, but really to intimidate the existing workforce. The original miners watched from their homes as these new men were loaded into the cage and sent down into tunnel number 9. William said it felt like watching lambs being led to slaughter. The shift was supposed to last 8 hours. The new men went down at 6 a.m. At 10:30 a.m., the emergency bell rang again. The cage came up with 12 men crammed into a space meant for 8. They were fighting each other to get out, climbing over each other, screaming and crying. One man had clawed his own face bloody. Another was speaking in tongues, or what sounded like tongues, a rapid stream of syllables that might have been words in some ancient forgotten language. Behind them, still in the cage, were 3 bodies. They'd been crushed somehow, their bones broken in patterns that didn't make sense. One man was bent backward at the waist, his spine snapped so severely that his head was touching his heels. Another had been compressed, his body shortened by at least a foot, the excess mass pushed outward so that he looked like a grotesque parody of human shape. The security forces tried to restore order, but there was no order to restore. The surviving replacement workers refused to go back down. They left camp that day, walking out with nothing but the clothes on their backs, preferring unemployment to another minute in that mine. This time, Blackwood himself came. He arrived on a private rail car, dressed in a suit that cost more than most miners made in a year. He toured the camp, looked at the equipment, reviewed the production numbers, and then he announced that he was going down into tunnel number 9 himself to see what all the fuss was about. Dalton tried to talk him out of it. So did the local sheriff, who'd been called in after the second incident. But Blackwood was insistent. He thought this was all hysteria, superstition, uneducated men getting spooked by shadows and strange sounds. "I've invested significant capital in this operation," he told the assembled miners. "I will not abandon a productive seam because of ghost stories." He went down with 6 of his security men, all of them armed with rifles. They carried enough lanterns to light up the tunnel like noon. They went down at 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., everyone in camp could hear the gunfire, muffled by rock and distance, but unmistakable. Rifles firing again and again, desperately, and then screaming. And then silence. The cage came up on its own at 3:30. It was empty except for one of the security men's rifles bent into a U shape, like it had been folded by some tremendous force. They waited until morning, hoping maybe Blackwood and his men would find another way out, would emerge from one of the other tunnels. But they didn't. The sheriff organized a rescue party, 20 volunteers, all armed, all carrying lanterns. William was among them. He felt obligated to go, even though every instinct told him to run in the opposite direction. They found Blackwood and his men about 400 yards into tunnel number 9, right before the entrance to the excavation area where they'd found the strange chamber and the hole. They'd been arranged. That's the word William used when he told this story. Arranged. The bodies had been positioned deliberately, carefully, laid out in a circle around the tunnel with their feet pointing inward and their heads pointing out. And they were wrong. Their bodies had been changed somehow, altered, like something had been experimenting with human form and hadn't quite understood the rules. Blackwood himself was in the center of the circle. He was still alive. His eyes were open and moving, tracking the rescue party's movements. His mouth was open too, and sounds were coming out. But they weren't human sounds. They were the same wet, scraping sounds that the miners had been hearing in the tunnel. His body had been opened from throat to groin, pulled apart but not separated, and in the cavity where his organs should have been, there was light. That same green light pulsing, alive. William said Blackwood's eyes locked onto his, and there was still intelligence there. Still awareness. Whatever had been done to him, he was conscious for it. He was still in there, trapped in what his body had become. The sheriff, a practical man who'd seen his share of violence, raised his pistol and shot Blackwood in the head. It was mercy, pure and simple. The body stopped moving, but the light continued to pulse for several minutes after death. They left the other bodies where they were and retreated to the surface. The sheriff immediately sent for the state authorities and the National Guard. This was beyond his ability to handle. What happened next was bureaucratic and predictable. The state sent investigators who interviewed witnesses, took statements, examined the bodies that were brought up. Their official report concluded that a pocket of toxic gas had been released during excavation, causing mass hallucinations and violent behavior. The deaths were attributed to a combination of gas exposure and trampling as men panicked. It was a lie, of course, a convenient fiction that allowed everyone to move forward without having to confront what had really happened in tunnel number 9. But here's what the official report couldn't explain away. The company decided to seal the tunnel permanently, not just number 9, but the entire Blackwood mine. They brought in crews to fill the shafts with concrete, to collapse the entrances, to erase any evidence that the mine had ever existed. If it was just gas, why the extreme response? Why destroy a profitable operation? Why write off millions of dollars in investment and infrastructure? Because the people making those decisions knew the truth. They'd seen the reports that didn't make it into the official record. They'd heard the testimony that was suppressed. They knew that something was down there that couldn't be killed or contained, only sealed away. The mine was closed by June of 1890. The entire mining camp was abandoned. The company offered the workers settlements in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements, promising they'd never speak publicly about what happened. Most of them took the money and left. They scattered across the Appalachians, finding work in other mines, taking their secrets with them. My great-grandfather, William, was one of the few who refused the settlement. He said he wouldn't be paid to lie about how his friends died. He moved his family to West Virginia and found work in a different mine, and he told this story to anyone who would listen. Nobody believed him, of course, not outside the community of miners who'd been there. But the story spread anyway, changing as it went, becoming legend and folklore. The details got exaggerated or softened, the timeline got confused, but the core truth remained. Something had been down there in tunnel number 9, and it had killed people. So what was it? What did they find when they broke through that wall? I've spent years researching this, looking through old records, geological surveys, historical accounts of the region, and I've found some things that suggest this wasn't the first time something like this happened in those mountains. There are Native American legends from the Cherokee and Shawnee people who lived in that region before European settlement. They have stories about certain places in the mountains that should not be entered, about holes in the earth that lead to the underworld, about things that live in the deep places and only come to the surface when disturbed. There are accounts from early settlers in the 1700s about mysterious disappearances near certain geological formations, about lights seen deep in caves, about sounds coming from underground that couldn't be explained. There's a geological phenomenon called a crypto-explosion structure. It's created when something impacts the Earth with tremendous force, creating a circular crater and fracturing the rock in distinctive patterns. The area where the Blackwood mine was located sits on the edge of one of these structures, created by an impact event that happened millions of years ago. What if something came down in that impact? What if it survived, somehow, buried deep in the earth, waiting in the dark for millions of years? What if the miners of the Blackwood Company didn't just find a coal seam, but something older, something that predated human existence on this planet? I'm not saying that's definitely what happened. I'm saying it's a possibility, and it's a possibility that fits the facts better than toxic gas or mass hysteria. Here's what I think happened. The Blackwood miners broke through into a chamber that had been sealed since that ancient impact. Whatever was inside had been dormant, possibly in some kind of suspended state. The excavation woke it up, and once awake, it did what it was designed to do. Maybe it was a predator. Maybe it was something else, something we don't have a category for. But it was effective at killing, and it was intelligent enough to use its prey in ways that terrorized the survivors. The arrangement of the bodies, the way Blackwood was still alive when they found him, the green light, the symbols on the walls of the chamber, all of it suggests intelligence and purpose. This wasn't a mindless animal, this was something that understood anatomy, that could manipulate biological matter, that could communicate in ways we couldn't comprehend. And it's still down there. The concrete and collapsed rock that seal Tunnel Number 9 aren't permanent. Nothing is permanent on geological timescales. Concrete degrades, rock shifts. Eventually, those seals will fail. I went to the site about 10 years ago. It's completely overgrown now. The forest has reclaimed everything. You can barely tell there was ever a mining operation there. But if you know where to look, you can find the filled-in shaft entrances, the collapsed buildings, the rusted equipment half buried in soil and vegetation. And if you go at night, if you stand very still and listen carefully, you can hear something. A deep vibration in the earth, so low it's almost below the threshold of hearing. A rhythm that might be breathing, might be a heartbeat, might be something else entirely. The local people know to stay away from that spot. They won't tell you why if you ask directly, but they'll find excuses. The ground is unstable. There are toxic chemicals left over from the mining. The area is private property. Whatever reason they can think of to keep you from going there. Because they know. The knowledge has been passed down through generations, becoming more diluted with each telling, but never quite disappearing. There are places in the Appalachian Mountains that humans shouldn't go. There are things in the deep earth that should remain undisturbed. The miners of 1890 learned that lesson the hard way. 5 men dead in the first incident, 3 in the second. 7 including Blackwood and his security team in the third. 15 people total, all because a mining company prioritized profit over caution, because warnings were ignored, because the people making decisions were too far removed from consequences to understand the stakes. This is the educational component of the story that matters. Listen to the people who are actually doing the work. The miners knew something was wrong. They reported it. They tried to stop it. But they were overruled by people who'd never been underground, who looked at them as expendable resources rather than human beings with knowledge and experience. How many industrial disasters follow this same pattern? How many times do workers raise safety concerns that get dismissed by management? How many deaths could be prevented if the people closest to the danger were given the authority to stop unsafe work? The Blackwood mine disaster wasn't about a monster in a tunnel. It was about a system that valued coal more than the people who dug it out of the ground. The creature in Tunnel Number 9 was just the mechanism of death. The real killer was the decision-making structure that sent those men down there despite all the warnings. And that system still exists today. The names change, the industries change, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Workers at the bottom of the hierarchy, their safety dependent on decisions made by people at the top who don't face the consequences of being wrong. So when you hear this story, don't just focus on the horror elements, the mysterious creature, the body horror, the supernatural terror. Focus on the human elements. Focus on Thomas Garrett trying to warn his supervisor about danger and being sent back to work anyway. Focus on Dalton telegraphing desperately for permission to shut down the tunnel and being denied. Focus on those replacement workers who were sent into a death trap without being told what they were walking into. Those are the real horror stories. The creature was just doing what creatures do. The humans knew better and did it anyway. I think about my great-grandfather William sometimes, working in those tunnels, knowing that every time he went underground could be the last time. He survived the Blackwood mine, but he died of black lung at 53, his lungs destroyed by decades of breathing coal dust. The mining company that employed him didn't pay for his medical care. They didn't provide any kind of pension for his widow. He gave his health and ultimately his life to dig coal out of the ground, and when he couldn't work anymore, he was discarded. That's the context this story needs. The Appalachian coal mines of the 19th and early 20th centuries were incredibly dangerous places, even without mysterious creatures. Men died in cave-ins, in explosions, from gas exposure, from equipment failures. They died young and they died poor, and the companies they worked for barely noticed, except as a line item in an accounting ledger. The monster in Tunnel Number 9 killed 15 people. Black lung and mining accidents killed thousands. Which is the real horror? But I'll admit, there's something compelling about the supernatural element. It's easier to be afraid of a creature in the dark than it is to be afraid of systemic negligence and profit-driven decision-making. One is visceral and immediate. The other is abstract and diffuse. That's why these stories persist. Not because they're true in a literal sense, though I believe the events at the Blackwood mine happened essentially as my great-grandfather described them, but because they let us confront fear in a manageable way. We can tell stories about monsters and feel frightened in a safe context, and then we can put the book down or turn off the podcast and feel relieved that it's not real. Except it is real, maybe not the specific creature with its green light and its ability to reshape human bodies, but the circumstances that led to those deaths, the choices that were made, the warnings that were ignored. Those are absolutely real and they're still happening. In 2010, 29 miners died in an explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine in West Virginia. Investigations found that the mining company had systematically ignored safety violations, intimidated inspectors, and prioritized production over worker safety. The pattern was identical to what happened at Blackwood in 1890, just without the supernatural element. In 2018, 12 workers died when a dam collapsed at a mine in Brazil, flooding the tunnels. The company had known the dam was unstable. Workers had reported cracks and leakage. Nothing was done until it was too late. The monster keeps killing, but the monster is us. It's the system we've built that treats human life as an acceptable cost of doing business. So why did the miners refuse to enter Tunnel Number 9? Because they knew something was down there that would kill them, and they knew their lives mattered more than coal. It shouldn't have taken a creature from the deep earth to make that obvious. It should be self-evident. But in 1890, just like today, profit speaks louder than human life unless people organize to demand otherwise. The miners at Blackwood organized. They refused. They stood together and said, "No, we will not die for your coal." And for a brief moment, they had power. Not enough power to prevent the company from bringing in replacement workers, not enough power to shut down the mine permanently on their own terms, but enough power to save their own lives. That's the lesson I take from this story. Individual miners couldn't stop the Blackwood Mining Company. But when they acted collectively, they could at least save themselves. The replacement workers who didn't know the history, who went down individually without the support of their fellow workers, they died. The original crew who stood together, who refused together, they survived. There's a labor organizing principle in there that's still relevant more than a century later. But back to the creature itself, because I know that's what draws people to this story. What was it? Where did it come from? Is it still there? I don't have definitive answers to any of those questions. What I have are fragments, hints. Pieces of a puzzle that doesn't quite come together into a complete picture. The symbols on the walls of the chamber, for instance. I managed to find a sketch that one of the investigators made before the official cover-up began. It was in a private collection, part of the papers of a state geological surveyor who worked in that region in the 1890s. The symbols don't match any known writing system. I've had linguists look at them, cryptographers, experts in ancient languages. Nothing. But there are similarities to other things. Petroglyphs found in deep caves in South America, markings discovered on meteorites, patterns that show up in certain crystalline structures. It's not enough to draw conclusions from, but it's suggestive. The green light has been reported in other contexts too. There are accounts from deep-sea exploration of bioluminescent organisms that emit a similar color. There are certain chemical reactions that produce that kind of glow. There are even some minerals that fluoresce in that spectrum when exposed to radiation. Could the creature be something that evolved in the deep ocean and somehow made its way into subterranean environments? Could it be something that arrived from elsewhere in the universe, surviving in the dark beneath the Earth's surface? Could it be something that's always been here, a holdover from an earlier epoch of Earth's history that we don't have any fossil record of? Any of those explanations requires us to significantly revise our understanding of biology, geology, or cosmology, which is probably why the official response was to seal it up and pretend it never existed. Easier to bury an anomaly than to rewrite the textbooks. But sealed or not, buried or not, it's still there. And seals don't last forever. I think about that sometimes, late at night. I think about that thing under the mountain in the dark, waiting. Maybe it's dormant again. Maybe it needs the presence of humans to activate it. Needs our warmth or our noise or something else we provide. Maybe it's awake and aware, patient in a way that things that have existed for millions of years can afford to be patient. And I think about what happens when the seals fail. When the concrete crumbles and the collapsed rock settles and shifts, creating gaps. When someone exploring those mountains stumbles across an opening that shouldn't be there. When curiosity or greed or simple bad luck leads someone down into those tunnels again. Will it still be there? Will it still be hungry? The pessimist in me says yes. The creature, whatever it was, showed remarkable resilience. It survived being buried for millions of years. It survived gunfire and fire and everything the miners and security forces could throw at it. A century of being sealed in concrete probably isn't going to make much difference. And eventually, someone will go looking. That's human nature. We can't leave mysteries alone. We have to know, we have to explore. Even when the exploration kills us, we keep doing it. Part of me admires that about our species. Our relentless curiosity, our refusal to accept limits, our drive to understand the universe around us. Those qualities have given us science and art and everything good about human civilization. But those same qualities got 15 men killed in tunnel number 9. There's a balance that needs to be struck between courage and caution, between curiosity and wisdom. The miners who first reported problems in the tunnel showed wisdom. They recognized danger and backed away. The company executives who insisted on continued production showed foolish courage. They charged ahead without understanding what they were confronting. Cornelius Blackwood died because he couldn't conceive of something that his money and authority couldn't control. He went down into that tunnel thinking he could assert dominance over whatever was there, that his will and his resources would be sufficient to overcome any obstacle. He was wrong. Very, completely, horrifically wrong. And that's another lesson worth considering. There are things in this world that don't care about human hierarchies or human assumptions. Nature doesn't respect wealth or power. Neither do the things that exist at the edges of nature, in the spaces we haven't mapped, in the deep places we haven't explored. Humility is a survival trait. The miners had it. Blackwood didn't. Guess who survived? I'm not advocating for a complete retreat from exploration or development. We need resources. We need to understand our world. But we need to do it with respect for the possibility that we don't know everything, that there might be consequences we haven't anticipated, that the old warnings might be based on real experiences rather than superstition. The Cherokee people who lived in those mountains before European settlement marked certain areas as forbidden. They had reasons for that, even if those reasons didn't make sense to the settlers who displaced them. Maybe if someone had listened to those old stories, the Blackwood mine would never have been dug in that particular spot. But we don't listen, do we? We dismiss indigenous knowledge as primitive superstition. We ignore the warnings of workers who actually do the dangerous jobs. We prioritize profit and progress over caution and preservation. And people die. 15 people in 1890, 29 in 2010, 12 in 2018. The numbers add up, incident by incident, disaster by disaster, a running tally of deaths that didn't have to happen. So here's my final analysis of what happened at tunnel number 9. Yes, there was probably something genuinely anomalous down there. Something that doesn't fit into our standard categories of life and matter. Something that killed people in ways that seemed impossible. But the creature was just the mechanism. The real cause of those deaths was a system that valued extraction over safety, that ignored warnings, that treated workers as expendable. The creature killed 15 people. The system has killed thousands. Which should we really be afraid of? I know which one keeps me up at night. It's not the thing sealed under a mountain in eastern Kentucky. It's the fact that the same patterns of negligence and profit-driven decision-making are still operating in industries around the world. It's knowing that workers are going into dangerous conditions right now, today, with safety concerns that are being dismissed by people who won't face the consequences of being wrong. The monster in tunnel number 9 was an aberration. The system that sent men to die in that tunnel is normal, standard, business as usual. That's the real horror story. But here's the thing about horror stories. They can teach us things if we let them. They can show us truths that are easier to confront in fictional or semi-fictional contexts. They can help us process fear and anxiety and prepare us to face real dangers. The story of tunnel number 9 teaches us to listen to warnings. It teaches us that workers closest to the danger usually have the best sense of what's actually risky. It teaches us that profit motives can blind people to obvious threats. It teaches us that collective action is more powerful than individual resistance. Those are all lessons that apply well beyond the context of 19th century coal mining. They're relevant to anyone working in any industry where safety and productivity exist in tension. They're relevant to anyone making decisions that affect other people's lives. And maybe, just maybe, the story teaches us something about humility in the face of the unknown. We don't know everything. The universe is stranger than we imagine. There are things in the deep places of the earth and sea and space that we haven't encountered yet. And when we do encounter them, we need to approach with respect rather than arrogance. Cornelius Blackwood went into tunnel number 9 with certainty that he understood what was happening. He died in horror, transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore, experiencing agony that lasted until someone mercifully shot him. The miners who refused to enter the tunnel admitted their uncertainty, their fear, their lack of understanding. They survived. There's wisdom in knowing what you don't know. There's survival in respecting your own limitations. So that's the story of why the miners refused to enter tunnel number 9. Because they encountered something that violated their understanding of how the world worked, and instead of pretending they could handle it, they admitted they couldn't and refused to die for someone else's profits. It's a story about labor organizing and collective action. It's a story about the cost of prioritizing profit over safety. It's a story about humility in the face of the unknown. And yes, it's also a story about a creature in the dark that killed people in terrible ways. All of those things are true. All of those things matter. The creature is still down there, sealed under concrete and collapsed rock, waiting in the dark. Maybe it's dormant. Maybe it's aware. Maybe it's something else entirely, something we don't have concepts for. But the system that sent those men to their deaths is still up here, still operating, still making the same calculations about acceptable risk and acceptable loss. Which one should we really be worried about? I think you know my answer. The mountain keeps its secrets, the dark keeps its creatures, but we keep making the same mistakes, keep sacrificing people to profit, keep ignoring warnings until it's too late. That's the real tunnel we refuse to enter, the one where we confront our own culpability, where we admit that the systems we've built are designed to extract value at the cost of human life, where we acknowledge that every disaster is both an accident and an inevitability. The miners of 1890 understood that. They looked into tunnel number 9 and saw death waiting, and they refused to die. We should all be so wise.